Behold our God, seated on his throne. Come, let us adore him. Behold our King. Nothing can compare. Come, let us adore him. Who has felt the nails upon his hand, bearing all the guilt of sin?
This is Faith Talk 99.5. If you're on social media, you'll love our pages. Like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter. Find the links at faithtalk995.com.
This is Faith Talk 99.5. Revive Our Hearts is coming up in 30 minutes. But now it's Searching for the Truth, sponsored by West 65th Street Church of Christ in Little Rock.
Welcome to Searching for the Truth, a live and local call-in program. Call in with your comments or questions now. 855-568-1062. That's 855-568-1062. Your friends at the West 65th Street Church of Christ in Little Rock invite you to open your Bible and study with us as Don McClain answers Bible questions with Bible answers in a search for the truth. This program is presented as part of the efforts of the West 65th Street Church of Christ in Little Rock to search for all the truth presented in God's Word and teach that truth to men and women who, like us, are searching for the truth. Now, here's Don McClain.
And good afternoon. What a gorgeous Thursday. Hope that you have had a wonderful one, and I thank you for being with me. And I think Bruce Reeves, who is also joining me this afternoon, I think he's glad that you're here too. How about it?
I am very glad.
I'm glad that you're here with
Thank
me,
you.
man.
Great to be with you.
Had a great day of study, and it's always good to have you, Bruce. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
All right. We've got some questions that we're going to deal with. Got a couple, in fact, that has come in, and we're going to be, in fact, one came in the other day, and I've put it off until today. I'm just for Bruce. And
whatever.
Yeah, and then we're going to get back into Romans 15 and talk about the Old Testament and the Christian. I've been talking about that the last couple of days. Very relevant subject, very important, I think, for us to understand. In fact, one of the most important books that I have in my library was written years ago, but it very well distinguishes the distinctions between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and that's a very important point to understand. I know 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 15, where it says to rightly divide the word of truth, doesn't mean necessarily to divide the Old Testament and the New Testament, but if you're going to properly understand the Scriptures, you do have to have an understanding of the difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament. So we're going to be getting back to that here shortly, but in the meantime, as I said, we've got a couple of questions. And we're going to be getting to those shortly. First of all, though, I would like to invite you to check out our website, w65stchurchofchrist.com. Check it out. All of the latest lessons are available on our website. You can go there and see the series that's been presented here the last several weeks on Jesus Christ and his last day, and the suffering in Gethsemane, the suffering in the trials, and the suffering on the cross, and then the resurrection. And then what does his resurrection mean? The implications of Jesus' resurrection. What does that mean? Who is Jesus now? Where is he now? What is he now? And there's important points that need to be made, and we need to get it fixed in our minds in reference to who Jesus is, and then how should that affect us. So all that's available on our website, w65stchurchofchrist.com. You can also watch the radio program each weekday afternoon right from our website, right on our homepage, or on our radio page, either one, and always going to be available live there. We've been having some difficulties on Facebook. Yes, I am in Facebook jail because I shared some links to our radio program on Monday. Something in that link and that post was offensive to somebody, apparently. And I feel sorry for that guy, really. I mean,
was that the section on the resurrection of Christ?
Well, that was the one that came. Yeah, I got a message from Facebook that someone found that offensive.
The resurrection.
Yeah, the in fact, I shared
That would
the
be
lesson,
terrible.
implications of Jesus' resurrection, and somebody found that offensive. Poor fella. But anyway, we are not allowed to share the links to our radio broadcast. So if you would please share. If you're watching us on Facebook, spread the word. Get it out there and let people tune in to us this afternoon. And also, we are live, and we have a phone number that you can call if you have a Bible question or comment. 1-855-568-1062 is the number. 1-855-568-1062. All right. Let's get to our question. I have a question for you in Ephesians 2:8. The Greek says both faith and salvation is God's gift. How do you answer? Definite article translated that in Ephesians 2:8 is in the neuter and refers to all the preceding verbs, the faith, saved, and grace. Well, first of all, let's check that out. I'll be more than willing to answer that. In verse 8 of Ephesians 2 says, "For by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves." There's the word right there, that he's referring to. That not of yourselves. It is the gift of God, not of works, lest anyone should boast. Okay? Bruce, that little word "that" right there, okay, what does that mean?
What does that mean?
What does that mean? Let me turn you up a little bit. Yeah.
Okay, do I need to get closer?
Yeah, you get closer to that mic there.
My conviction about that is that he is, there goes that word "that" again, that this particular term refers to salvation. It is salvation by grace through faith, but it is salvation that is the resulting gift of God. And I'm pretty certain A.T. Robertson, who was a well-known Baptist scholar, took the same position.
Yes, I just pulled up A.T. Robertson, actually, Robertson Word Pictures. For by grace, explanatory reason, by the grace already mentioned in verse 5, and so with the article, through faith. This phrase he adds in repeating what he said in verse 5 to make it plainer. Grace is God's part, faith ours. And that, and there you have it, neuter, not feminine. And that's important too. It's not just a matter of being neuter, but also not feminine. And so refers not to pistis or faith, feminine, or to charis, grace, feminine also, but to the act of being saved by grace conditioned on faith on our part. Paul shows that salvation does not have its source out of you in men, but from God. Besides, it is God's gift. So salvation is the gift. It's not just, or it's not also inclusive of faith and grace. Although grace is certainly God made the provision of salvation by his grace. But salvation is the gift. That is not of yourself. What? Salvation is not of yourself.
Which is his point in that context.
Exactly.
Yes.
And also, Vincent, Word Studies, that not faith, but the salvation. So,
and we might ask, in what sense is somebody arguing that faith is a gift? I mean, is it the Calvinistic argument that it's an irresistible gift?
More than likely.
Yeah, so the notion that faith is an irresistible gift only to certain persons who God arbitrarily pre-chose
is not supported in this passage.
No.
And that's the point I'd want to make to you.
Yeah.
So salvation is the gift. And A.T. Robertson does make that important distinction that, the being feminine, that changes. I mean, that's important, not feminine. So you've got the tense and everything. The word through faith is our part, in other words. So appreciate the question. And if you have a follow-up to that, would be more than glad to let you explain it. Our phone number again, 1-855-568-1062. In fact, let me just go back to the passage. Let me demonstrate it. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourself. It is the gift of God, not of works, lest anyone should boast. you can take this same principle. This is a principle that is established also in the Old Testament. We can illustrate it, for example, in Joshua chapter 6. God extended grace to the children of Israel. He gave them the city of Jericho. Verse 2 of Joshua 6. I've given you the city, the king, and its mighty men of valor. And then he tells them to march around that city for 6 days, one time each day. On the seventh day, march around it 7 times, and then the priests were to blow the trumpet, and the people were to shout. Now, when the children of Israel did what God commanded them to do, by faith, Hebrews 11 and verse 30 says, the walls of Jericho fell by faith after they were encompassed. So you've got salvation, or you've got the walls of Jericho falling by grace through faith. Now, the city was the gift. The walls of Jericho fell by grace through faith, and that not of themselves. It was a gift of God, not of works, lest any of them should boast.
You know, Don, to your point of that illustration, which is an excellent one, if you look at the way that text is constructed there in Ephesians 2, so for by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. I just think it's important to understand the gift is salvation conditioned on faith.
Yes.
And by God's grace. So, of course, he would say it that way.
Right.
Because we're not saved without God's grace, and we're certainly not saved without our response through faith. And notice the instrumentality, through faith. We're saved by grace through faith,
right,
which goes to your illustration. Yeah. But then he says, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God. That term for that there, taute in the Greek, would point, I think, to the salvation that is conditioned on faith and by the grace of God. But it doesn't say grace and faith are what he really has in mind by themselves.
Right.
Yeah.
So appreciate the question and hope that helps. All right. Got another question, Bruce. And this is a correspondence that I've been having with this fella on Romans 14 and some things that he was concerned about, because he points out in a previous email that Romans 14 is only dealing with 2 specific issues: the eating of meats, and specifically the meats that were restricted under the law of Moses. And now that the law of Moses has been taken out of the way, Paul is making the point, and that's now a liberty. It's not a matter of law, it's now a matter of liberty. And people could eat pork if they wanted to. If you wanted to have a pulled pork sandwich, go for it. Just don't do it in front of someone and trying to lure someone who is convinced that it's still wrong, and causing them to stumble and violate their conscience. Don't do that. That's what he says don't do. But you can eat that pulled pork sandwich if you want to in the privacy of your own home.
I'm definitely a Gentile then. But go ahead.
And then also, of course, the holy days.
Yeah.
Okay. So he points out, well, these are only 2 things. How can you put anything else in there? And I had a chart that had a lot of other things in there, including observing days. If we had our secular holidays and those kinds of things that we wanted to observe, if we're not doing it in a religious way, as a matter of faith, we think that if we think that we have to observe Christmas and we make that even a religious holiday, he, by the way, is specific in this context or in this text message or email that Christmas is what he's mostly concerned with. If somebody wanted to set aside a day, Bruce, to remember the birth of Jesus, and that was their own personal formula for, that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to set aside a particular day every year to study, to reflect upon, and meditate upon the birth of Jesus. Would there be anything wrong with that?
No, I mean, it'd be great to think about it every day.
It would be.
But
if you just wanted to take a day and just really meditate on that, and maybe on another day you wanted to meditate upon the crucifixion of Jesus. On another day you wanted to meditate upon the resurrection of Jesus. On another day you wanted to meditate upon a certain passage.
We do that when we have regular Bible study, by the way.
Sure.
But okay, go ahead.
But if you wanted to do that, because we're talking about scriptural subjects, we're talking about biblical subjects, and if you wanted to do that, I say fine. You're at liberty to make that decision if that's how you want to construct your life and your year. It's fine. But as far as establishing a religious holiday, who has the right to do that?
Nobody.
If the scriptures do not establish that as a holiday, then no. So as a religious day, no, we shouldn't, and we're in agreement with that. But then he also talks about Santa Claus, and okay, first and foremost, it has a Santa Claus, and it's true that listen, I already have mentioned this, and he says he's aware that I talked about this. Christmas does have a pagan origin. So does Easter. So does Halloween. Pagan origin. Of course, we're closer, I guess, to Halloween. And surprisingly, he didn't want to talk about that. But
seems like the one he wanted to talk about.
yeah.
But anyway, go ahead.
Anyway, yeah. Okay, they do have pagan origins. I understand that. And if I'm going to observe these days from a pagan perspective and place any significance, religious, spiritual significance in these things, and I'd be wrong in that. Okay. All right. Santa Claus, though, he emphasizes specifically has some very dangerous connotations. What about Santa Claus? All the characteristics or the qualities of Santa Claus. In fact, I'll just read a section of this. I know you will say you do not keep this holiday religiously, true, but socially or for the family. So putting that to the side, what is the normal practice of the celebration of Christmas? It is that Santa will either reward or punish you for your behavior throughout the year. No, I guess some kids believe that. But I don't know of any adults that do. Sounds kind of like what God does. And I will say this, okay? We do need to be very careful about what we lead our children to believe, and there is a danger. If you want to stress Santa Claus and try to convince your child that there is a Santa Claus, and you give him all the characteristics of a divine person, and then when they become 8, 9, 10 years old, they find out that Santa Claus isn't real. They may also then develop the tendency not to believe you when you've told them all this time that God is real.
Well, I would not judge someone else that may tell their kids there's a Santa Claus, depending on how they handle that. But to your point, that we never did tell our son that there was a Santa Claus, because I just didn't want to go through that process and then him figuring everything out, which he was going to do pretty quickly. But we always want to be careful if it turns into some kind of effort at deception for years and years, or telling a story and then having to see that unravel. That's a whole nother kind of ethical principle that you might have to work through in your mind. But dealing with this, I would say, on the other hand, if we're going to say, okay, anything that has pagan origins has to inherently be wrong and something we can have nothing to do with, people probably need to research a little bit more about what all has pagan origins. For instance, they might want to look at the days of the week and find out, go look at the pagan background on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. There's something there. So there's got to be some balance.
The months
here.
of the year. Just because something had pagan origins does not mean that someone who observes it in a secular way, or doesn't mean that they are making that connection. I had one fellow tell me one time, Bruce, that a Christmas tree is sinful and it's idolatry because you bow down when you put a present under it, or you get a present out from under it.
Well, that means I'm worshiping the refrigerator too, because I bow down all the time to get food out of the bottom of it. I think it can get a little ridiculous here.
Yeah, listen, if the mind is not engaged, the will is not engaged, and you're not doing it as a matter of reverence for that tree, then there's no idolatry connected to that. I'm sorry, there's just not. There's no difference between that and any other ornament that you may have in your house or that you put up, decorations or what have you. Now, if you place some emphasis on that and you view that tree as having some power and some spiritual significance, then yeah, you got a problem.
I would say, along with that, it's probably worth saying that it is ironic to me and odd and concerning that, as far as what scriptures command us to do as Christians, we are given the example of Christians carrying out the Lord's
Right.
Supper every first day of the week. And that's something so many religious people neglect to do, and yet they all almost dogmatically question your faith if you don't believe Jesus was born on December the 25th, which obviously he was not.
Yeah. Somebody points out Santa Claus was actually a real person, St. Nicholas. He did live and has a great history about him. But, okay. Saint, of course, I'm a saint too, by the way.
St. Don.
That's right.
Do you tell your wife that all the time?
First
I'm the saint?
Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 1 to the saints
Yeah.
in Corinth.
We are all saints. as
All Christians are saints. So, okay. But he points out, he gives several passages here emphasizing the need to keep ourselves unspotted from the world. James 1:27, 1 Peter 2:9. And of course, I would also emphasize 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 13 through 16. We're to be holy just as God is holy. We are a holy nation, a peculiar people. But, you know, here's something somebody told me a long time ago. You know, if the world does something, just because the world does something does not mean that it's wrong for you to do it. Mm-hmm. You know, if the denominational world comes in the church buildings that they go to worship in through the door, does that mean that we have to crawl in through the windows just to be different?
No. Yeah, you can kind of stand up so straight you bend over backwards.
Yeah, and that's a problem, you know.
Yeah.
And the reality is that you know these things. I don't think the world looks at people who view things from a secular perspective as. I just don't think that matters to them.
Don, there are people that don't even believe in God that go through the nationalistic kind of ceremonial Christmas time stuff. Now, some don't, but I'm just making the point. There is a national kind of recognition of this this time with your family. It doesn't necessarily have to be a religious
Right, and this is
thing.
a time of year in which everybody's off. Most people are off. They're given time from their jobs to be with their family. Take advantage of that. You know, take advantage of the opportunity to have people, you know, that you're not with most of the time to get together. And there's nothing wrong with those things. Again, if we're making some religious observance out of it, then we're crossing the line. If you're making some pagan observance out of it, you're crossing the line. Don't do that. But, you know, if you look at it like July 4th, you know, what's wrong with that? I don't see, you know, I think that this does fall in the matter of liberty, you know, so, you know, and he makes the point again, finally, you say that Romans 14 has these principles, but say you agreed it is only covering the two topics. Listen, the Bible teaches in principle. These two specific topics in Romans 14 are the topics mentioned, but you can take that and you can make the applications to a lot of different things. And we pointed out Romans 14 is not dealing with matters of faith, matters of doctrine. It's dealing with matters of liberty. If you want to go to a football game this Saturday, go for it. If you don't want to go to a football game, don't go to a football game. That's something that the world does. And the world, I tell you what, the world has, here would be a point I think that would be significant to remember. I think that a lot of Americans have made football into a religion.
It's not?
I mean, really.
Yes, they have.
And it's their idol. And, you know, it's wrong for them to do that. But that doesn't mean I can't go to a football game. I'm going to my grandson's football game tonight, a junior high football game in Harmony Grove. And, you know, that's okay. It matters what you make out of it. Now, for this fellow who's writing, I'd advise you, my friend, not to have anything to do with it. Don't violate your conscience, but you need to study the matter some more, okay? So, and again, the principles that are established in Romans 14, we are given brains by our God to be able to make the connections, to make the applications, and use the principles to establish, you know, whether something is right or wrong. Because God does not tell us everything that's wrong. He does provide us with everything that is right, everything that he wants, and the principles by which we can discern whether something is good or bad.
Well, the context, though, and you said this, but it's important for people to understand, you can't throw everything into Romans 14. And so there are principles there, and they regulate those issues that qualify to go in that context.
Right.
But we have to be careful with that.
So, all right, let's go back to Romans 15, and I was talking about the law and the Christian yesterday, and I was emphasizing. I've already talked about, Bruce, the reality that this text specifically, for whatever things were written aforetime, were written for our learning, that through patience and comfort of the Scriptures we might have hope. He's really pointing to Jesus Christ in this text. And it is the Old Testament that points to Jesus. It is the Old Testament that confirms that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that through a study of the Old Testament, we can come to know that, and understand it very clearly. In fact, Paul does this throughout the book of Romans, doesn't he? He goes back to the Old Testament and emphasizes that, Jesus is the fulfillment of the old law. Mm-hmm. The Jews coming into the body of Christ is a fulfillment of the old law. The Old Testament speaks of that. So he uses the Old Testament to support what he's teaching. And we're already out of time. You're kidding me. My goodness. Well, time got away from me today. Also, we cannot follow the bad examples of the Old Testament. We have principles established there, and we are to follow the good examples. There's faith, and I talked about that a little bit. But anyway, Lord willing, I'll be back tomorrow afternoon. Hope that you can join me till then.
The Church of Christ that meets at 7115 West 65th Street in Little Rock has presented this program in the interest of searching for the truth. To request a past program, religious discussion, sermon CD, or religious literature, call 501-568-1062. That's 501-1062. You can email Don McClain by going to the church's website, w65stchurchofchrist.com. If you prefer to write to the West 65th Street Church of Christ, the address is P.O. Box 190062, Little Rock, Arkansas 72219. Please join us for Bible study this Sunday morning at 9 a.m. and worship at 10 a.m. Sunday evening worship begins at 5 p.m. We also have a Wednesday evening Bible study at 7 p.m. You're welcome at any and all of these services. Tell your friends to tune in each weekday at 3 p.m. for Searching for the Truth on Faith Talk 99.5. We hope our efforts will help you as you search for the truth.